So, hello there, and welcome back to another Night of the Movies podcast. I'm Spy Knight, and in these podcasts, I love talking all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, we haven't guessed already by the giant lightsaber I'm holding right now, I am continuing on with my Star Wars film reviews as I review the final Star Wars movie, the final main Star Wars movie, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. So, let's get into it, shall we? Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker was released in 2019. That's right, this Star Wars movie was released 6 years ago now. The last Star Wars movie to be released came out 6 years ago, which is crazy to think about. We're not going to get another Star Wars movie, a new Star Wars movie, until next summer. When I say next summer, I don't mean the summer that we've got coming up in literal weeks' time. I mean the summer of 2026. We wouldn't have had a Star Wars movie for 7 years. I know people wanted a hiatus from Star Wars movies after Episode 9 came out, but I don't think people were expecting a 7-year hiatus at that. I mean, I know COVID changed things, but still, a 7-year hiatus between Star Wars movies is kind of crazy when you think about it, especially when they're all under Disney now. You think Disney would be churning these films out year by year, but apparently not. However, like I said before, going back onto what I was saying, this Star Wars movie, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, released in 2019. And it was the final Star Wars movie in the sequel trilogy, and it was also being billed as the final Star Wars movie in the Star Wars Skywalker saga. And it was also the second Star Wars movie to be directed by J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams, who previously directed The Force Awakens, the seventh Star Wars movie, the first movie of the Star Wars sequel trilogy. He came back to direct this film. And if you don't know who J.J. Abrams is, I already said in my review of The Force Awakens, do go and check that out if you haven't already, by the way, because it takes forever to edit these videos. It takes forever to film as well, because I ramble on like mad. So yeah, do go and check out my review of The Force Awakens if you haven't already, because it honestly, it means a lot, because I spend so much time doing these Star Wars reviews. I spend so much time doing them, so yeah. But if you didn't check out my review of The Force Awakens, I said in my review of that film that J.J. Abrams, if you don't know by name, he has directed such other movies outside of The Rise of Skywalker and The Force Awakens, such as Mission Impossible 3, which is still my favourite Mission Impossible movie. Yes, by a... maybe not by a long shot. I was about to say by a long shot. No, I think Fallout and Rogue Nation are pretty great. But still, he directed Mission Impossible 3. He directed Super 8, which I think is a wonderful Spielbergian adventure film. He directed the 2009 Star Trek reboot. He directed Star Trek Into Darkness. He was one of the people behind Lost. I think he directed the first episode of Lost. He's been around in Hollywood for quite a bit of time. He's still working as a producer now. Just recently, I've been watching the Presumed Innocent TV series on Apple TV Plus, and I didn't know this prior to watching the series, but he is attached as an executive producer on the series. J.J. Abrams has been working in Hollywood for quite a bit of time, and he is a self-professed Star Wars fan. Is that the right phrase there? I'm not sure. But he gets the point of making. He has spoken in the past about how much of a Star Wars fan he is, and I think you can tell that when you watch The Force Awakens. And when his name was announced as a director of the 9th Star Wars movie, I remember being deliriously excited, because I don't care what anybody says, and I still love what J.J. Abrams did with The Force Awakens. And I loved The Last Jedi, which I know is a controversial opinion, but I don't care what anybody says. I love The Last Jedi. I absolutely love that. I'm not afraid to say that. I don't care what anybody says. I'm not trying to hide it anymore. I love The Last Jedi. And after seeing The Last Jedi, I remember counting down the days to when the sequel came out, to when the next Star Wars installment was to come out. I remember even counting down the days to when we got the title reveal for Episode 9, when we got the first trailer for Episode 9, and luckily enough, they were on the same day. I remember they had Star Wars Celebration in 2019, in April of 2019, and the title was released with the teaser trailer for that movie. And I remember watching the teaser trailer for this film, watching the teaser trailer for Episode 9 over and over again, and watching all these people react to the trailers and react to the return of Palpatine. I was like, oh my god, it feels so great to be a Star Wars fan right now. I had so much hope going into this movie, and every time I heard that a new trailer was coming out for this film, I would count down the days towards that trailer coming out. I'd count down the days to when that new trailer was going to come out for this movie. And I got so excited to watch this film because I was a fan of the sequel trilogy. I mean, I still am, and I'll talk about that more later on in this review, but I was a big fan of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, so I was even more excited for this movie than you probably think. Like, when I said I was counting down the days to when this film came out, I genuinely mean I was counting down the days. Like, when I remember on my calendar, I used to like cross the days off leading to the Rise of Skywalker in the couple of months before December, before the Rise of Skywalker came out in December of 2019. I could not wait to see this film, is the point I am making. And I was so excited about seeing this movie that I went to a midnight screening of it. This was the first time I went to a midnight screening of a Star Wars movie. Well, of a movie in general. I don't know why I said Star Wars movie there. It was the first time I went to a midnight screening of any movie. Is it? Yeah, it was. I don't know why I'm feeling like I'm missing something there. But no, it's the truth. This was the first time I went to a midnight screening because I wanted to know what was going to happen first. I didn't want it to be spoiled for me, because even though I loved The Last Jedi, one thing I didn't admit in my almost 90-minute review of that movie is that I did have a couple of things spoiled for me going into The Last Jedi. Like, I knew that Snoke died going into that movie, and I wish I didn't, and I didn't want the same mistake going into The Rise of Skywalker. However, going into The Rise of Skywalker, I was cautiously optimistic. And I was cautiously optimistic because, well, I want it to be great. It's a Star Wars movie. I want all Star Wars movies I watch to be great. But the reviews had come out about a week before I saw the movie, and the reviews were mixed. I don't usually follow Rotten Tomatoes, but I did back then. I was one of those people who would look at Rotten Tomatoes whenever a new film came out to see what the critics' score was on that movie. And I remember seeing that the critics' score for The Rise of Skywalker was something like 52%. I think it may even be 52% or 53%, which is about the same percentage that The Phantom Menace has on Rotten Tomatoes. And we all know how divisive The Phantom Menace is. Pinks. Sorry, bad cough there. But anyway, when I saw that the critics' score for The Rise of Skywalker wasn't great, I was worried. And worried with a capital W, because that hadn't been the case with the previous two Star Wars movies. I know that The Force Awakens wasn't for everybody, you know, it's evident if you just look online, and I know The Last Jedi was a very divisive movie, but the critics' scores were always great for those films on Rotten Tomatoes, and the critics loved both of those movies. And then to hear that the critics weren't loving the conclusion to that trilogy, to this trilogy, had me worried, had me very worried. So I was going into the cinema knowing that. I was going into the cinema to watch this film at midnight, thinking, okay, this film may not be for you, you know? The critics aren't loving it, you may not love it, and it might not be the satisfying conclusion to the sequel trilogy and the Star Wars saga as a whole, which you wanted it to be. And coming out the cinema, I did an initial reaction on this channel. I remember actually recording my reaction coming out the cinema. I was telling myself that I loved the movie, but I didn't. I did not love the movie coming out the cinema. And I remember going to watch it a second time and thinking, yeah, this film is disappointing. This is not the film I wanted from the conclusion to the sequel trilogy and the conclusion to the Star Wars saga as a whole. This is not the film I wanted, nor is it a particularly well put together Star Wars movie, nor is it a particularly well written Star Wars movie. And every time I went to the cinema to go and see this movie, and I saw it about 4 times in the cinema, I don't know what that says about me, but I saw this film about 4 times in the cinema, and every time I went to go back and rewatch it, I would try to convince myself that I loved the film, but every time I'd come out going, yeah, I didn't love that. Nevertheless, I would never come out the movie thinking, I hated that though. I absolutely despised that movie. I despised my 2 hours and 20 minutes of watching The Rise of Skywalker. That's about the length of the movie. It might be just over 2 hours and 20 minutes, bigger the point I'm making. Whenever I'd come out the cinema after watching The Rise of Skywalker, I never felt like I hated it. I would always just feel underwhelmed by it. And that's still kind of how I feel today. I mean, it's not kind of how I feel, it is pretty much how I feel about this movie today. I don't hate The Rise of Skywalker. I don't even really dislike it. I think it's an okay film. But I also think it's a disappointing movie. So, yeah, that's how I think about The Rise of Skywalker now. And I'm going to do something in this review today, which I don't think anybody on YouTube has, anybody else on YouTube, and I'm over-exaggerating that because there will be people on YouTube who have done this. But I'm going to do something which people don't seem brave enough to do on YouTube or do with their film reviews nowadays. I'm going to defend this movie. I'm going to defend The Rise of Skywalker because, as I just said, I think this is an okay film and it is enjoyable to watch. And with those two sentences, Spy Knight lost all his credibility as a film reviewer. I may well have just turned many people off my channel. But I can't lie, and I don't want to lie to myself. The amount of people I've heard shitting on the sequel trilogy and completely disregarding this movie, I just think is unfair. I understand that the sequel trilogy wasn't for everybody. Again, I said this in my review of The Last Jedi. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But the way people have been shouting at each other online about the sequel trilogy, and the way people made you feel bad for liking a certain movie in the sequel trilogy. Like, I remember watching this video, and I'm not going to name who made the video, but I remember watching this video on YouTube around about the time that Rise of Skywalker came out, and this reviewer was saying, you know, in so many words, I mean, not this, he wasn't saying this, you know, verbatim, but they were saying in so many words that if you're a fan of The Rise of Skywalker, if you're a fan of the sequel trilogy, well, you're dumb. And I just don't think that's the case. All film is subjective. Don't forget that. You know, there's some movies which other people watch, and I just don't get. They're not for me. Like, people love, and this is going to make me sound like an absolute idiot, and I don't care, but people absolutely love the Avengers movies, particularly Avengers Endgame, and those movies aren't for me. The first time they came out of Avengers Endgame, I thought, you know what, that's not a bad movie. The more I think about Avengers Endgame, the more it doesn't work for me. And so, you know, all films are subjective, but I'm never going to have a go at anybody for liking Avengers Endgame. I might debate the film with them in a respectful manner, and that's totally fine, but I'm never going to make anybody feel bad for liking that movie, and I'd hope people do the same for me when it comes to this movie. I'd hope no one made me feel bad about liking The Rise of Skywalker, because I do enjoy this film, even with the plethora of problems it has, and I know it's got a gazillion problems, I still kind of like watching it. I was watching it earlier today, for this review today, and I couldn't help but get into it. I mean, I was building some Lego Star Wars at that, because I got some Lego Star Wars for my birthday not too long ago. I was building some Lego while I was watching the film, and I finished building the Lego, and I was meant to do something else, and I didn't do the other thing, and I just decided to fully engage myself with the movie, and to me, that tells you that a film is working. And I enjoy this film, not just because it's enjoyable to watch. I enjoyed this film for some other legitimate reasons. At least I think they're legitimate reasons anyway. I enjoy this film, and this is going to sound like a petty reason, but it's not. Do stick with me here. I enjoy this film because I'm a Star Wars fan. And again, that sounds like a petty reason to like this movie, but it's not, because to me this film feels like a Star Wars movie. Maybe it's because I watched it in the cinema, but I can't help whenever I rewatch this film, I can't help but get the Star Wars feels from it, whether it's in the way it's shot, because I do think this is a beautifully shot film. I don't care what anybody says about, you know, the way this film looks, because again, I think people just disregard this movie and say it's complete and utter rubbish, when I don't think that's the case. The way this movie looks, there were certain shots when I was watching the film earlier today, and I was thinking, wow, this is a beautiful, and I mean beautiful looking Star Wars movie. And I think that J.J. Abrams, you can tell this movie that he is trying to make the best film possible. And now, obviously he didn't, but I think directing-wise, not writing-wise, because he's credited as a co-writer on this movie, and I don't think it's a particularly well-written script, particularly the first half of the film, which is, which has some quite bad dialogue, to put it kindly. But I was watching this film earlier today, and I was quite surprised by how I didn't notice that there were quite a lot of these one long take shots throughout the film. It felt like J.J. Abrams was always trying to keep the film moving forward and keep the camera moving. It felt like, again, he was excited to make a Star Wars movie. I said the same when I read The Force Awakens. I said in my review The Force Awakens that it felt like J.J. Abrams, when it came to that movie, when it came to directing The Force Awakens, was excited about making a Star Wars movie. And it feels the same here. Although I don't think he fully succeeds in his execution all the time, I like what he does with this movie. I like, yet again, that J.J. Abrams goes into this movie and goes, okay, what haven't we seen in a Star Wars movie before? What is something people have always secretly wanted to see in a Star Wars movie before, but we haven't done in a Star Wars movie before? And what you get in this movie are things like, Rey and Kylo Ren doing a lightsaber duel where there's this stormy weather going on in the background, and doing this lightsaber duel over the wreck of a Death Star in the ocean. That's pretty cool, just the way it looks, and that whole idea is something, in the back of our minds we've kind of always wanted to see in the past. We've kind of always wanted to see a lightsaber duel happening in stormy weather with the rain, literally battering down on the lightsabers. But we haven't had it in a Star Wars movie up to this point. And in this movie, we get to see, all the Star Destroyers coming out of this ice, which doesn't make any sense. But we get to see all these Star Destroyers coming out of the ice from under the ground, and on this planet called Exegol, where there's always lightning. And again, that's something we've always kind of wanted to see in a Star Wars movie. We didn't get to see in a Star Wars movie up to this point. And there's other things like that throughout this movie. There's other things in this film where it's like, okay, yeah, J.J. Abrams does this really well. He manages to tap onto something we've always kind of wanted to see in a Star Wars movie and puts it in this film, if you follow my thinking. I said about The Force Awakens, and I say again about The Rise of Skywalker. J.J. Abrams, he knows how to use the familiarity. He knows how to fuse the familiarity with the new, with the difference, and I think that works quite well when it comes to this film. Plus, I think the performances in this movie are all great. I said this in my previous two reviews, and I'm sticking by it. I think this is the best performance Daisy really gives in the entire sequel trilogy. I think she's good in The Force Awakens. I think she's wonderful in The Last Jedi. I think she's great in this film. This is the only Star Wars movie, and again, not to take anything away from her performance in the previous two movies, not at all, but this is the only Star Wars movie where I fully believe her as a character. I never feel like I'm watching an actor play the character. Whilst I do kind of feel that a little bit with The Force Awakens and a teeny weeny bit with The Last Jedi, but I never feel like that with this movie. Daisy really is great in the role. Regardless of what they might do with the character of Rey in this film, I still think Daisy really is brilliant in this film. I think John Boyega I think you can tell he's enjoying himself making this movie. And I know John Boyega has said some questionable things about Disney Star Wars over the past couple of years. Some things I agree with, some things I get, some things I'm like, why are you saying that? People would kill to be in Star Wars, and you're acting like it's just another job. But regardless of what John Boyega may or may not have said after this movie came out, he has spoken about the fact that he enjoyed making The Rise of Skywalker, he enjoyed the shooting, the filming experience. And I think you can tell that when you're watching the film. I think Oscar Isaac is good as Poe Dameron in this movie. This might be my least favourite performance from Oscar Isaac in the sequel trilogy as a whole, but I still think he's good in this movie, and I think that Ian McDiarmid is great back as Emperor Palpatine, great returning as Emperor Palpatine. It feels like he's never left that role, and Adam Driver is awesome as Kylo Ren, aka Ben Solo, in this film. And I love Richard E. Grant in this movie. Richard E. Grant feels like he is loving it. It feels like he is loving playing this this First Order officer in this film. It feels like he's eating up every chance he gets to be on screen. So yes, I think that all the performances in this film, even the ones I haven't mentioned, like Billy D. Williams returning as Lando Calrissian, I think all that stuff is great. I think visually this film is beautiful, as what he mentioned. I love how it expands on the Star Wars galaxy and actually makes the Star Wars galaxy feel like a galaxy, because that's one of the things people complain a lot about, particularly with like The Mandalorian and, you know, Mandalorian adjacent shows from Disney Star Wars, and they're saying everything feels too small now in the Star Wars galaxy. It doesn't feel like a Star Wars galaxy anymore. Whilst say what you will about this movie, and say what you will about the sequel trilogy as a whole, but the majority of this trilogy has been expanding on the Star Wars galaxy. The majority of the sequel trilogy is introducing us to new planets in this galaxy. I know we see Cloud City in this film again. Well, actually, no, it's not called Cloud City, it's called Bespin. I know we get to see Bespin in this film again. I know we get to briefly see Endor in this film again. And I know we see Tatooine at the end of this film again too. But there are plenty of new planets in this film, like Kijimi, which is where you meet Zoe Bliss. Then you also get Exegol, which is where Palpatine is in this movie. You get the new Resistance planet, which I've got the name of off the top of my head right now. I remember the name of it was on the latest Lego Star Wars game, but I just can't remember off the top of my head right now. And there's also the planet where you get the Death Star wreck. There are plenty of new planets in this film, is the point I'm making. Passano, which is the sand planet you see in this movie. I know that might be a bit confusing that it's another sand planet that's not Tatooine or Jakku, but still, you know, I like that this movie expands on the Star Wars galaxy and makes the Star Wars galaxy feel like a galaxy. Plus, the John Williams musical score is soaring, and I mean soaring throughout this film. It felt like John Williams just went full on out with scoring this movie, as he said prior to the film coming out that this was going to be the final Star Wars movie that he was going to score. And I think the Han Solo scene in this film is beautiful. I think it's beautiful. Particularly because, well, it harks back to The Force Awakens in a very nice way, in my opinion. But also, I think that's the one scene in the film which always hits me emotionally. And I think it hits me emotionally, and this is a bit of a, I'm going on to a, yeah, I'm going to get a bit personal here. I think that Han Solo scene hits me emotionally because this was the last movie. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker was the last movie I watched at the cinema with my dad. After The Rise of Skywalker came out, my dad got increasingly more ill and he just wasn't able to go to the cinema again. And this, like I said, was the last movie I watched with him at the cinema. And I remember watching that Han Solo scene in the cinema with him and feeling like we connect without having said anything, if you get what I mean. And whenever I watch that Han Solo scene in the movie, whenever I rewatch this film and get to that Han Solo scene, I feel like I'm in the cinema again, watching this movie with him. I always remember watching the film with him, and even though he was never a Star Wars fan, my dad was never a Star Wars fan. He enjoyed Rogue One because to him it felt like a war movie, but he was never a Star Wars fan, and he always joked about that with me. But I remember him watching this film, and when Wedge Antilles comes back in that very brief cameo in the final space battle of this movie, I remember him turning to me and going, "Oh, that's Dennis Lawson. He was in Local Hero." And I remember just the smile on his face when Wedge showed up. It was like, it was worth the price of admission in itself. You know, that's what people say, and it truly was. And yeah, I love the Han Solo scene in the movie. I love how that's done. I think that is like I said, a beautiful scene in the film. And there are a lot of things I like about it. I don't care what anybody said. You can clearly tell that a lot of time and effort has been put into this film. And I enjoy it because it moves at a swift pace. I think it's not badly made by J.J. Abrams. I don't think it's nearly as well made as it could have been, but I don't fully blame him for that. I'm going to get onto that a bit later. And to me, this is a fun Star Wars movie. It feels like a Star Wars theme park ride for better or for worse. You know, sometimes when a movie feels like a theme park ride, it can often make it feel empty. But again, I don't think this film feels empty. I'm not sure if I said this already in this review, because my head's all over the place because of hay fever right now. I don't know if you can tell I'm quite bummed up in this review because hay fever was really getting to me, and so I'm not on top form. But this film is full of heart. It's full of heart. You get that in the relationship between our central main characters, and in the scenes with Leia, and in the scenes with Luke, and in the scenes with Han. I love all that stuff in the movie, and because of all that stuff, there is a heart to the film, in my opinion, something which is always evident in J.J. Abrams' movies. And what was the point I was making? It was something like, I forgot what I was trying to say. Oh yeah, it feels like a theme park ride. But sometimes when people say that, you know, it's making the film sound like it's empty. But I don't feel like this film is empty. I do think there's a heart within this movie. You know, it does nevertheless feel like a theme park ride. And it feels like a Star Wars theme park ride at that. And for a lot of people, I understand why that might not work for them. But the thing is, I'm a Star Wars fan, and I'm a fan of theme park rides. So you put those two together, and you get this movie, and I kind of like the fact that it feels like a Star Wars theme park ride to me. I like that about it. And again, you know, I'm not trying to convince myself that I like this movie. I can't help it. I don't really know why, but whenever I rewatch it, I enjoy it. Maybe it's because I watch it in the cinema. Maybe it's because it was after Solo. It was a Star Wars movie after Solo that I saw in the cinema. And I'll probably get around to reviewing Solo in the next couple of weeks on this channel. Maybe it's because it was a Star Wars movie that I watched after Solo in the cinema. And I remember coming out Solo feeling so disappointed, then coming out this movie, and because Solo to me didn't feel like a Star Wars movie, then coming out this movie thinking to myself, well, at least it felt like a Star Wars movie. At least to me, that was a Star Wars movie that I got to watch at the cinema, you know, and I loved that feeling. So maybe it's because I got to watch in the cinema, maybe because it moves at a fast pace, or maybe it's because I find it enjoyable, but I don't really know what the main reason is. However, I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy this film. However, I would also be lying if I sat here and completely defended it. Because, as I've already said, oh my god, I've been saying because a lot in this review today. Take a shot every time I say because. I don't know why, but that word always comes to me when I'm doing these reviews right now. But, I'd be lying if I said, you know, that I'd be lying if I sat here. Yeah, I wouldn't be true to myself. That's a better way of putting that. I wouldn't be true to myself if I sat here and completely defended this movie, because it does have a lot of problems. Let's talk about probably the most controversial thing coming out of this movie. Rey being a Palpatine. I don't mind this. And I don't mind it because I was watching a reviewer talk about it, and they opened up a different perspective on the whole Rey being a Palpatine angle. That being said, I would have preferred her being a nobody. I think her being a nobody from The Last Jedi is perfect. I don't think they should have left that. And what they did in this movie is react to the backlash to her being a nobody from The Last Jedi. I mean, there's a lot of that with this movie. There's a lot of negating the stuff from The Last Jedi and reacting to it and, what's the word I'm looking for? Changing it around. That's not the word. That's not what I'm trying to say. But they reverse. That's what I'm trying to say. They reverse a lot of the decisions made from The Last Jedi, and this is one of them. In The Last Jedi, to me, it was made pretty clear that Rey is a nobody, and they were going to stick with that. And then J.J. Abrams came in, clearly didn't agree with Rian Johnson's idea that Rey is a nobody, and when actually she's going to be a Palpatine. And according to Daisy Ridley, she did an interview talking about this. It wasn't actually decided until halfway through the production of this film that she was going to be a Palpatine. It wasn't decided until halfway through the movie what her lineage was going to be. At one point in the script, she was going to be a Kenobi. And I'm like, what? How does that work? Especially if you knew the Emperor's coming back. So, anyway. But that also doesn't totally surprise me. Films get rewritten all the time during the production of a movie. You know, the chances are probably your favourite movie, your favourite blockbuster movie, got rewrote time and time again during the production. So, the fact that it was rewritten a lot doesn't surprise me. But what does surprise me is that they didn't have it planned who Rey was going to be, because it was a big thing in The Force Awakens. Who is this character? Who is this nobody? Who's got Force powers and everything like that? Not the best way of putting that. Who's got Force sensitivity? Is brilliant with a lightsaber. Who is this person? And then you get to this movie, and she's a Palpatine, and it's like, if they planned that from the beginning, they could have foreshadowed it in The Last Jedi more. But they don't. Even so, Luke Skywalker quietly says in this film, me and Leia always knew you were Palpatine. So he says something like that in the movie. I'm like, well, if you did, then why didn't you say something in The Last Jedi? So yeah, I don't love her being a Palpatine. I don't. And I don't think they should have reversed the decision from her being a nobody from The Last Jedi. That being said, again, as I said earlier on in this review, I listened to somebody talk about it, and they opened up another perspective on her being a Palpatine, and that is the idea that you can come from a terrible background, from the worst of people, but you can rise above those people and you can still be something special. So in The Last Jedi, the thing that got me with her being a nobody was like, you can imagine kids watching The Last Jedi and thinking, well, I'm a nobody too, and I can be a Jedi just like Rey. Whilst when you get to this movie, although it negates that, and although I prefer the whole idea of her being a nobody, again, I'll just reiterate that I prefer that idea, I don't mind her being a Palpatine, because I can imagine kids, or anybody at that matter, watching this movie going, well, I come from quite a dark background. I have a dark past, and my parents weren't necessarily the best. A lot of people come from rough backgrounds, may have had a rough childhood. I can imagine kids, or anybody for that matter, watching this film and thinking to themselves, well, Rey's past isn't defining her in this movie, so you know what? My past isn't going to define me either. And so, because of that reviewer who opened up my perspective to the whole Rey being a Palpatine thing like that, I've been able to like it more. I still think she should have been a nobody. I still think she should have been a nobody. But I don't mind her being a Palpatine. I can get past that, because to me that says, your past doesn't define you. You may have had bad things happen to you. You may have done bad things in your past, but it's how it shapes. But it's you are the person who shapes your future. And to me, Rey embracing her present self, her future self, and being a Skywalker says that with this film. She is not a Palpatine, even so, biologically she is. She doesn't end up being a Palpatine. She doesn't follow in Palpatine's footsteps. So, yeah, I don't mind her being a Palpatine. I just would have preferred if she wasn't. And on the topic of her being a Skywalker, I know everybody likes to make fun of the final scene in this movie where you get that random person in the desert on Tatooine asking her, who are you? And she says, she looks into the distance, she sees a Force ghost of Leia and Luke, and she says, I'm Rey Skywalker. And I know a lot of people have made fun of that scene to death. And in all frankness, and if I wasn't being frank, what's the point of me doing this review today? I don't think the scene is as well executed as it could have been. I think she should have gone to Tatooine with Finn and Poe, and I think they should have asked her, who are you? Because they don't really know. Or do they know? I can't remember. No, yeah, they do know, actually. Sorry, they do know that she's a Palpatine. But it should have been a character who was already with us throughout the film, in my opinion. Maybe like C-3PO and R2-D2. Going back to Luke's homestead on Tatooine. I think it would be more effective if a different character asked her who she was. Even though they kind of already knew who she was. I still think it would have been more effective. But I don't mind that final line. I don't mind that she says, I'm Rey Skywalker. And I'll tell you why I don't mind it. First of all, the saga was always going to end with the word Skywalker, because at the end of the day, this is a Skywalker saga. So I don't mind that. I didn't know what the end of the film was going to be. I didn't know what the last scene was going to be prior to watching this movie. I didn't know any of the spoilers going into watching the movie. I made very sure that I didn't know any of the spoilers, but I knew deep down going into watching this film in the cinema that the last line of dialogue in this film was going to be something Skywalker. I just knew that. I think everybody else knew that. And I think everybody else also knew that the film would end on Luke's homestead on Tatooine. So yeah, I don't mind that the last line, I actually kind of like that the last piece of dialogue in the Skywalker saga is Skywalker. And I also don't mind that Rey is calling herself Rey Skywalker, even though she is not a Skywalker, because to me that's saying that anybody can be a Skywalker, even if you're not biologically a Skywalker, if you don't come from the Skywalker lineage, you can be a Skywalker yourself. You don't have to be Luke's son or Luke's grandchild or Leia's son or Leia's daughter, whatever. You don't have to be part of the Skywalker family in order to be a Skywalker. Anybody can be a Skywalker. And Rey, as what he said, she doesn't let her past define her, and instead she embraces her present self and she embraces her future self and she becomes a Skywalker. And what I'd like if they ever make the Rey movie, which apparently is in the works, although we haven't really heard anything about it since like Star Wars Celebration 2 years ago. Not even Star Wars Celebration this year, Star Wars Celebration 2 years ago, which I was at. If they ever make the Rey movie, which they announced, what I'd like in that movie is maybe Skywalker being like the name of the academy the name of the new Jedi Order that she is teaching. Make it not just a second name. Make it a name which means something if you ever given that name. If you get what I mean, make it something like, if you're Skywalker, you're somebody special. You have to earn that title. To me, that's what Rey does at the end of this movie. So I don't mind her being a Skywalker. I don't mind the last scene in the film. I just wish it was slightly better executed, because it kind of comes out of nowhere. She goes back to Luke's homestead. Why? That isn't set up early on in the movie, and it just it kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. And I understand why a lot of people are making fun of it. I've even heard some of my closest friends make fun of that final scene. However, I don't mind it. I don't mind the final scene in the movie. I'm just being honest. If I wasn't being honest, what's the point of me doing this review? So yeah, those are just some of the biggest things which people argued about coming out of this movie. But people also said that bringing Palpatine back wasn't for the best. And while I get where they're coming from, I might be alone on this island. I love the Palpatine scenes in this movie. I love them. And maybe that's because of Ian McDiarmid's performance, but I don't care what anybody says. Whenever I watch this movie and I get to the Palpatine scenes, I get excited. I love the way they're done. I love all the lighting in the Palpatine scenes. I love Ian McDiarmid's performance. And whenever you see Palpatine in this movie, he feels threatening to me. Maybe he feels threatening because I've already seen Revenge of the Sith, where I've seen Palpatine at his full powers, and Return of the Jedi, when you also see Palpatine use his lightning bolt again. But, I'd be lying to myself if I said that I didn't like the Palpatine scenes in the movie, because I do. But I also see where people are coming from when they say that they wish Palpatine wasn't in this film. Because I've been thinking about it, and what I would have preferred is that Palpatine didn't come back, or maybe came back in like a cameo role, very briefly, not as the main villain, and that Supreme Leader Kylo Ren was the main villain in this film. I would have much preferred that. And then you could have still redeemed him, because I think everybody knew that redemption was happening. The sequel trilogy very much mirrors the original trilogy, and obviously Darth Vader had his redemption in the final film in the original trilogy, in Return of the Jedi. So I think everybody knew that Kylo Ren's redemption was coming. But still, I would have preferred Kylo Ren being the main villain in this film, and then he gets redeemed towards the end, and once his redemption happens, the whole First Order is like, okay, who do we turn to? The whole First Order goes into complete disarray during the war, and they end up fighting with themselves. You end up having this infighting, something which you get a lot of in the Andor TV show, and I think, it just would have worked. I think that would have worked better. I don't think we needed Palpatine in that. And that's coming from somebody who likes the Palpatine scenes in this movie. I'm maybe the only person in the world who likes the Palpatine scenes in this film. But still, I would prefer Palpatine not to be in this film, and for Kylo Ren just to be the main villain. And when he turns good, when he finally realises the mistakes he's made, and redeems itself. The First Order goes into complete disarray, and at that, if my version of the film ever happened, he would go around killing all the members of the First Order, including General Pride, Richard E. Grant's character. Kylo Ren would go around killing all the big members of the First Order, fully redeeming himself because of what the First Order did to the galaxy. But they didn't go that way, and they had Palpatine instead. And although I don't think Palpatine is used to the best of his abilities in this movie, I still enjoy the Palpatine scenes. I wish it was in the film more. I wish it was in the film a hell of a lot more. But I don't mind the scenes with him in this movie. I actually quite like them. I'm just being honest. What can I say? But, I do wish he was in the film more. And I have a tinfoil hat theory. Maybe it's not a tinfoil hat theory, actually. I don't know if it is. But I swear I heard reports that this film was a lot longer. That there was a J.J. Abrams cut of this movie. And the fact is, there probably was a J.J. Abrams cut in this film, but, because it's a Disney-produced movie, they got final cut on the film. That happens with any Disney-produced movie. It's not just the sequel trilogy. Literally, every Disney movie you can think of, the chances are, not the chances are, the reality is, Disney, the studio behind the movie, have had final cut on the film. So, yeah, the fact is, there probably was a J.J. Abrams cut of this movie, but it doesn't feel like we necessarily got the J.J. Abrams version of this film, the J.J. Abrams and Disney version of this film, which is, both of their visions. To me, this film feels more like Disney's vision, and what I mean by that is, I think, and I've heard reports, I can't find those reports online, but I swear I've heard reports that this film was a lot longer and Disney edited a lot out from this film. There were reports out there that the opening scene of this movie, the opening of this film was very different. It wasn't Kylo Ren and, Mustafar, Mustafar at that point in the galaxy and that point in the Star Wars timeline. It wasn't Kylo Ren and Mustafar. Apparently, originally the film opened with the Knights of Ren, who were terribly misused in this movie. The Knights of Ren wrecking shop on this new planet. And according to reports that I've read, that was filmed but wasn't included in the final cut of the movie. And I've seen some photos from the shooting of this film, from some of the set pieces, particularly on Mustafar in the opening scene of this movie, where you see Darth Vader's castle in the distance, and yet that isn't included on the final cut of the film. There is no Darth Vader's castle in this movie. And although that sounds like a small thing, and perhaps it is, and it may not make a big difference in the grand scheme of things. Like if Darth Vader's castle was included on this film, it's not going to change my opinion on the movie. The chances are it's not going to change most of people's opinions on this movie, but it would have harked back to Rogue One, and maybe harked back to some of the animated stuff, because I've heard from my brothers that Darth Vader's castle, appears in the animated Star Wars stuff, and it's things like that where I've heard all these bits and pieces that actually a lot was edited out from this movie. I remember when this film was shooting, John Boyega posted on Instagram this photo of both of his hands bloody, and was saying something like, long day of shooting, but it's all going to be worth it come December 2019. And I was thinking, oh wow, they're going to do something special with Finn in this movie. But they don't. They don't really do anything special with Finn. And Finn in this movie feels, sidelined. I don't really like what they do with Finn in this movie. And whenever I watch this film, and I'm watching Finn's storyline, I'm like, what was the thing he was talking about? Because I swear as well, and I don't know if this is the truth, but I swear John Boyega's come out and said that day on set they was talking about, and the thing they filmed for this movie wasn't included in the final film. I've heard some reports, and again, these may be false reports. I'm not saying these are legitimate reports, but I have heard some reports nonetheless that there were scenes filmed for this movie where Finn used the Force, and that thing that he wants to tell Rey early on this movie, like you hear him at one point say early on the film, Rey, I need to tell you something. It was that he is Force sensitive, and he did actually get to say that. And they filmed a scene where he got to say that in the original cut of this movie, and in the final battle, in the Battle of Exegol in this film, you got to see him use the Force. But that wasn't included. And I would have liked that included because I loved the Finn character coming out of The Force Awakens. And I don't care what anybody says. I enjoyed what they did with him in The Last Jedi. I know even John Boyega said he didn't really like what they did with Finn in The Last Jedi, but I did. However, I would have liked, when it comes to this movie, for Finn to be a Jedi. Or not even just a Jedi, to use the Force. I would have liked there to be that payoff from The Force Awakens. And looking back on The Last Jedi, although I don't mind Finn stalling in that movie, what they really should have done with Finn in that film is have him go off to Act 2, where Rey's being trained by Luke, and Luke trains Finn as well. I don't know how that would have worked, and maybe it would have worked poorly, maybe that would have worked at all, and it would have taken away from the relationship between Rey and Luke in that movie. But still, I think you needed that payoff with Finn being a Jedi in this movie, and you didn't get that. You needed that payoff with Finn being... with Finn using the Force in this trilogy as a whole, and you just don't get that. And apparently they shot scenes where you did get that, but they weren't included on the final cut. And I remember coming out of this movie thinking, what did Finn want to say to Rey? And then I watched into a John Boyega where I was like, oh yeah, he wanted to tell her that he was Force sensitive. I was like, well, I didn't get that from the film, and I do think this film should have made that a hell of a lot clearer. And I've heard other reports as well that there were scenes involving Luke which were completely cut from the film. I mean, I remember the first Vanity Fair cover on this movie included a bunch of stills from the film. This, before the film released, they had, in the marketing for the movie, had this Vanity Fair cover shoot showing scenes that were being shot for the movie, and there was a scene of Luke and R2-D2 with this sort of fiery background, and that scene is not in the film. Luke and R2 don't share a scene in this movie at all. There's no fiery background in any scene in this movie, and it's like, what? Where was that Luke scene in this film? I would have loved to have seen that scene. And I do think that the original version of this film was different than the version we got. I don't know how different, but I remember a couple of months before this film came out, in December of 2019, there were reports that extensive reshoots were taking place on this film. And I completely believe those reports, because I think they changed a lot, and I think they took out a lot of potentially great stuff. Like, I also heard that scene where you see Luke training Leia in that flashback, which is a great scene. It still gives me goosebumps now. Apparently that scene lasted for a lot longer, and again, it only lasts like 30 seconds of the film, if that. And yeah, apparently a lot of this film was changed in the edit, which is not a big surprise, because at the end of the day, Disney get final edit on all of their movies. But apparently a lot of this film was changed in the edit, and I think you can tell that when you're watching the film. And I have sometimes wondered, what was the J.J. Abrams version of this film that we never got, and the chance that we'll never get? Because I think J.J. Abrams would have given us more of a what am I trying to say here? More of a connectivity between The Last Jedi and this movie in the stuff that wasn't included. And maybe he wouldn't have, but I feel like there's a lot missing. And I think you can tell it when you watch the film, because it moves so quickly. Like, the pacing of this film is so in your face. It moves at such a fast pace. And I think that's because Disney were worried that the film was originally going to be too long. I reckon the film was originally 3 hours, because if you look, The Force Awakens was 2 hours and 20 minutes, The Last Jedi was 2 hours and 34 minutes. I reckon, and this film was only 2 hours and 21 minutes long, or something like that, I reckon this movie was originally 3 hours. I mean, heck, it's the conclusion to the Star Wars saga. I would have loved it to be 3 hours. I remember the one time this film was reviewed, I was like, they're going to conclude the Star Wars saga in 2 hours and 21 minutes. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case, because you look at something like Return of the King, that's, just the theatrical cut of that film is 3 hours and a half, and they leave stuff out of the theatrical cut of Return of the King. And the extended cut is 4 hours and a half. And that's when it really feels complete. And the thing is about the Rise of Skywalker, it doesn't feel complete. It doesn't make the trilogy feel complete. It actually makes the trilogy feel incomplete. And what you get is a film that feels rushed. And I think it feels rushed not because of J.J. Abrams. I mean, J.J. Abrams makes fast-paced movies. But The Force Awakens is a fast-paced movie, but it's a well-paced film. It doesn't feel rushed, whilst this movie feels rushed. And I don't fully blame J.J. Abrams for that. I don't, not fully blame him at the same time. I do think he is somewhere to blame there, but I also blame Disney because I think, and again, I don't know this, I haven't heard any reports saying this. This is one thing I haven't heard any reports on, but I reckon J.J. Abrams was... I reckon he was not as involved as the editing in this movie as was for The Force Awakens, and I reckon that Kathleen Kennedy and maybe the producers on, other producers on the film came in and... By the way, I don't want to sound like I'm dissing on Kathleen Kennedy. I really like what Kathleen Kennedy's done with Star Wars. I might be the only person who says that in the world, but so be it. I reckon she came in, and I reckon the people behind this movie, the producers, who were spending their money on this film, were like, we don't want to have another responses film like we had with The Last Jedi, so let's just do all of this, let's edit all this, let's edit anything that's slightly risky, that might upset fans, and let's play it safe. Because at the end of the day, that's one of the Rise of Skywalker's biggest flaws. It plays it safe, especially after The Last Jedi, which didn't play it safe and subverted expectations. I know a lot of people don't like The Last Jedi, but you've got to admit, it subverts expectations from like scene to scene to scene. But this movie, well, it doesn't. You know, you think it's going to take a risk. You think that the stakes are going to be higher, are going to be, are going to be increased in a certain scene, like when C-3PO becomes a Sith droid. You think that the stakes are going to be increased at that scene, but then, well, they're not. It becomes a Sith droid for like a couple of minutes, and then his mind is erased, but then his mind is completely reinstalled, for lack of a better phrase, when he sees R2-D2 again later on the film. I'm like, why did we need C-3PO being a Sith droid then? There wasn't a purpose to that. The stakes keep getting raised, but then quickly decreased. And it doesn't feel nearly as risky. It feels like they played the whole film safe. There's not one moment in the film where I'm like, okay, I think the Resistance might lose this war. Whilst in The Last Jedi, when I'm watching the Battle of Crate, I feel like they might lose. And, well, they do lose that war. They only just managed to get away. But here, in this film, the Battle of Crate feels inconsequential because Resistance, well, it's a fully formed army again at the start of this film. I'm like, well, it wasn't at the end of The Last Jedi. And although I love The Last Jedi, what I think should have happened in The Last Jedi to set up this film is Lando should have showed up at the end of that movie with the Millennium Falcon. Rey should have gone to get Lando and pick up the Resistance and should have taken them to Lando's base. And that's how you set up the Rise of Skywalker. That's how you set up Lando's returning. Because even so, I love Lando in this movie, and I love seeing Billy D. Williams back. It doesn't feel earned. Like when you get Han Solo in The Force Awakens, it feels earned. Chewie, we're home. When you get Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, it feels earned. See you around, kid. And when you get Leia in both of those movies, it feels earned. But Lando doesn't feel earned in this movie. And I wish he did. I still enjoy watching Lando in this movie, but I think they should have set its storyline up at the end of this film. Maybe not at the end of the last film, sorry. At the end of the last film. Maybe even not. You didn't even need to have him show up. You could have just said something like, Leia could have said something like, I know where to go. To an old friend. And everybody would have known who we're talking about. But we didn't have anything like that. And I do think that was one of the mistakes of The Last Jedi. And on the topic of Leia, I like the Leia scenes in this movie. And I understand why they did what they did and worked around old footage of her from old deleted scenes and footage and behind the scenes footage of her from The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, and included that in this movie. And the technology that went into doing that is mind blowing. Like, it did feel at times watching this film like, although Carrie Fisher had sadly passed away by the time that this film was shooting, that she had somehow shot new scenes from this movie. That being said, I would have preferred somebody else to come in and play Princess Leia in this movie. There was a sort of there was a campaign at one point. I don't know if campaign's the right word, but I heard at one point that people wanted Meryl Streep to come in and play Princess Leia in the final movie, to play General Leia in the final film, in this movie. And I would have kind of liked that. Meryl Streep is an Academy Award winning actress, at least I think she is, at least Academy Award nominated actress, and to have her come in and play Leia in the final film would have made sense to me. And also, she was friends with Carrie Fisher, with the late great Carrie Fisher, so I think the late great Carrie Fisher would have been fine with that. But I think the problem is because the late great Carrie Fisher passed away, and they wanted Leia to be a part of Episode 9, they tried to work around it, and I'm not sure the way they did it was the best way. I like the Leia scenes in this film. I just can't help feeling like they missed an opportunity with Leia, because I swear again, and this might just be my dreams, but I've got a feeling out there, there's reports about the Rise of Skywalker, about what it originally was. I swear that I heard the original idea for the Rise of Skywalker was that Rey was going to be trained by Leia. And I know she is being trained by Leia, but I mean properly trained by Leia. And that Leia would be a fully fledged Jedi when it comes to this film. Because in Empire Strikes Back, you get that line from Obi-Wan Kenobi as a Force Ghost when he says, "No, there is another one." When Yoda says, when Yoda sees Luke's X-Wing flying away and he goes, "He is our last hope." And then Obi-Wan says, "No, there is another." And Leia was the other. And that would have fulfilled that bit from Empire Strikes Back, that loose thread from the original trilogy. But they didn't really get to fulfill that in this movie. I know they kind of did, but not to the degree that I think they wanted to. And I don't blame anyone for that, because Carrie Fisher sadly passed away. But I do think they should have recast the role of Leia and had that storyline in there. I understand why they didn't, and I don't mind that they didn't. However, it's also kind of done this thing now where it feels like we can't recast any of the legacy roles in these movies because the response to Leia was mostly positive. It feels like, with The Mandalorian, we can't ever recast Luke Skywalker. Even though Sebastian Stan is right there working with Disney already, it feels like we can't ever recast the role of Luke Skywalker because people are going to be mad about it. And it's like, I would prefer recast, personally. Still, I like the Leia scenes in this film, and I think her death is done beautifully. And there is a lot of other stuff in this film which doesn't really make sense. The whole Battle of Exegol, in my opinion, is not particularly well done, and is a rather disappointing Star Wars battle. It's not terrible, but I don't get why so much of the focus of that whole battle is on this one Star Destroyer, when you get like hundreds of Star Destroyers in that one scene. And there's horses, these weird like space horses riding on the Star Destroyer that don't really provide a purpose. And I'm like, why? Why did we need all that? Why do we need the Final Order in there? The Final Order don't feel built up enough and just feel kind of thrown into this movie. And they kind of come out of nowhere. They do come out of nowhere. Apparently we're all living under the ice on this planet Exegol, and again, it doesn't really make any sense. And the whole idea of Snoke just being a pawn in the Emperor's game is kind of a neat idea on paper, but doesn't really work when it comes to this movie. When you see all the Snoke cloned in the machine, there's just a lot about this film that I could go on and on about, which doesn't really work. And the dialogue in the first half of the film is, well, it's near atrocious. It's terrible dialogue. It's the sort of dialogue you get in like a Disney Channel movie. I do think the dialogue and the scenes get better in the later half of this film, but I was at one point watching the film earlier today thinking, if I just muted this film and watched each scene play out, I think I might be enjoying this film a little more. I mean, I'm not going to mute the film because I'm loving the John Williams musical score, but the dialogue isn't the best. And I do wish that J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio, who wrote the film, just wrote a couple more drafts of the script. Like, fully thought out every line of dialogue, because it feels like every line of dialogue in this movie, well, not every line of dialogue, but it feels like, particularly in the first half of the film, the dialogue is being thought of on the spot by the actors. And that is not always a good thing, particularly with a big blockbuster movie like this. And I briefly mentioned it there. I'm going to go into more here. Let's talk about the John Williams musical score. I have to talk about the musical score of the Star Wars movie whenever I view a Star Wars movie on this channel, and I always have to talk about it, especially if it's a John Williams musical score, and this is John Williams' final Star Wars musical score. I, surprise, 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 love the musical score to this movie. That being said, I think it's the second worst Star Wars musical score. I think the worst Star Wars musical score is from, well, the worst John Williams Star Wars musical score is from Attack of the Clones. And again, I still love the musical score to Attack of the Clones, but there's just something about that score and it doesn't quite feel complete to me. And I kind of feel the same about the Rise of Skywalker score. Especially as Don Williams, who is John Williams' brother, which is kind of funny to say, by the way, the fact that John Williams has a brother called Don Williams, like, it's all the names. It's like the parents went, well, how close can we get to the name John? How about Don, anyway? So, Don Williams, who is John Williams' brother, and who plays a timpani. I don't know why I did that for timpani, but you know. Anyway, he plays a timpani on all of John Williams' scores, apparently. I don't know if that's the truth, but I think he does. He said that there were 6 hours, I'll just repeat that, 6 hours of music recorded for the score for this film. And to put that into context, on the official soundtrack that was released for this movie, the official soundtrack that you can listen to on Spotify for this film, it only lasts about an hour. And granted, there's a lot left out of the official soundtrack, a lot of unused music that'll probably be released in the future. That happens with most official soundtracks which were released. So let's say that the score overall lasts about 2 hours and 20 minutes, probably about the length of the film. That's still, what, 3 hours and a half of music, around about that, which we might never hear, which John Williams composed this movie, which we will probably never hear. We might hear bits and pieces, but apparently, according to Don Williams, I swear at this report from like StarWarsNet.com, that John Williams composed 6 hours of music for this film, and just the thought that we're never going to hear some of that music, like 3 hours worth of music for this movie that's composed for this film, is, well, as a huge John Williams fan, as a huge fan of John Williams' music for 9 of these movies, it's heartbreaking to think about. I'd love to hear John Williams, or the music that was composed for this film that wasn't used. You know, I'd love to hear that. Just to hear more John Williams Star Wars music gets me excited. It gives me goosebumps. But the chances are we'll probably never ever hear it, which is sad to think about. And it's sad to think that John Williams wrote all that music for this movie and so much of it wasn't used. I feel bad for him because, you know, he wasn't young when he did the musical score to this movie. I mean, he's in his mid-90s now. It would have been like 89 or 90 when he did the musical score to this film. And it's just sad to think that, you know, he probably worked so hard on the musical score. I mean, you can tell that he worked so hard on the musical score when you listen to the musical score, and to hear that he would have worked extra hard and we're not even going to hear the extra effort he put into it, I don't know, it just, you know, it makes me feel a little sad. And it's also one of the reasons that this is not one of my favourite, and is on my rankings, it's nearer to the bottom of my rankings of the John Williams Star Wars musical scores, because there was so much that was apparently left out of this musical score. Nonetheless, there is a lot of great themes in this musical score, like the theme titled "The Rise of Skywalker," the main theme for this film. Da 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 da. I just tried to badly sing it there, but that piece of music alone makes this film feel more like a conclusion than the rest of the film in itself. I love The Rise of Skywalker, the main theme for this film. I also love the theme Anthem of Evil. Bum 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 bum. I love that theme in this movie, and I love how they get all these other returning themes, like obviously Rey's theme comes back a lot in this movie, but you hear the Emperor's theme come back a lot as well. You hear Vader's theme come back in a lot of great parts, and yeah, there's just so much about the musical score that I absolutely love. It really feels like John Williams went all out, bringing back a lot of those classic themes from the previous Star Wars movies with this movie. I do wish we heard the Duel of the Fates, the Duel of the Fates theme in this movie, because I swear it was teasing, like a teaser trailer, like a TV spot for this movie, that we were going to hear that Duel of Fate theme again, you know. But we don't get to hear it in this movie. And there's one bit in the film when you're in the Emperor's throne room on Exegol, and you hear this choir go, ha 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 ha. I mean, I'm reenacting it badly, but you hear in the musical score this choir heighten in the orchestral musical score, and I do think there that the Duel of the Fates theme was meant to be played. but for some reason they didn't include it. And maybe it's because the prequels were devised. But again, it just feels like this movie. It feels like the producers didn't want to annoy anyone with this movie, so they didn't want to include anything that might annoy a Star Wars fan. Whilst I think that would have, I think that would have been thrilling to a Star Wars fan to hear the Duel of the Fates theme in the final duel of this movie. Would have been like, even if the rest of the film didn't work for them, I think it just would have made them look on that final duel in a different light. And I do wish there was more callbacks to the themes in the Star Wars prequel trilogy in this movie, because it doesn't really feel like there are. I love the callbacks to the musical themes from the previous two sequel trilogy movies and the original trilogy movies. I just wish that there was more callbacks to the themes from the prequel trilogy, because say what about the prequel trilogy, love it, hate it, want to marry it, whatever, the music to those films are phenomenal. So yeah, I love John Williams' musical score to this movie. I do. I just can't help but feel like somewhere out there was a lot more music that John Williams composed for the movie that we're never going to ever hear. And that makes me feel sad. So whenever I listen to the Rise of Skywalker soundtrack, and I do, I don't care what anybody says, I love the music of this film, so I'm still going to listen to the soundtrack to it, regardless of what I might think of the movie. I mean, I think the movie's okay, but, you know, it's not nearly as good as it should be. I still can't escape that feeling like we're missing a lot of the score. And not because a lot of the score hasn't been released. That happens with, like, all of John Williams' musical scores. Eventually, the complete score will be released, but still, hopefully get the point I'm making. It just feels like, well, it doesn't quite, to me, feel like the final John Williams Star Wars musical score to me. I mean, his end credits theme for this film ends in a similar way to the end credits to Revenge of the Sith and Return of the Jedi, so it's all sort of mirroring, the musical scores and mirroring themselves, but still, I just, apart from the Rise of Skywalker theme in itself, which sounds like a finale theme in itself, I just can't help but feel like the rest of the score doesn't quite feel like the final Star Wars John Williams musical score. And if we ever heard all of that 6 hours of music which John Williams composed for this movie, maybe I'd feel differently, if you follow my thinking. I don't know how much I'm making sense, because I've been rambling on a lot already, and I'm going to ramble on a bit more here. Because I've spoken a lot about what I like and dislike about this movie, and there was a lot that I dislike. And I don't really want to focus on the stuff that I dislike too much, because I feel people have already done that, you know, to death on YouTube. So I don't want to focus on the stuff I dislike too much. But what I do want to talk about is what the original plan was going to be for this movie. Because originally, this film was going to be directed by Colin Trevorrow. J.J. Abrams came in as a director after Colin Trevorrow departed the project in 2017. And Colin Trevorrow, if you don't already, he's directed movies such as Safety Not Guaranteed. I think that's what the film's called, with Aubrey Plaza and Jake Johnson, which I quite enjoy that movie. It's quite good. And he also directed the first Jurassic World movie, which I enjoy, I like. And he also directed Jurassic World Dominion, which I despise with a capital D. I hate Jurassic World Dominion. Hate it so much. But anyway, Colin Trevorrow directed those movies. He's probably best known for directing those films. And he was meant to direct this movie originally. And his ideas for this film were a lot different to the end result of this movie. I mean, first of all, in Colin Trevorrow's script for the film, which leaked a couple of years back on YouTube from a film pundit that I actually follow on YouTube quite a bit, Colin Trevorrow's script was leaked, and his original ideas for episode 9 were leaked. And apparently the original title for this film was Duel of the Fates, which harks back to The Phantom Menace, and as I've already said, is a theme that plays during Darth Maul, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's duel at the end of the first Star Wars movie. And that is a pretty cool title for the movie. I actually do kind of prefer over the title Rise of Skywalker. I don't mind the title Rise of Skywalker, and I think it kind of fits with the end of this film, but I do prefer the title Duel of Fate. And in Colin Trevorrow's original idea for the film, Palpatine is included, but not nearly as much. He's only included as a hologram early on in the film. Rose and Finn are apparently a couple, as were Rey and Poe, which I don't really love. I don't like the idea of Rey and Poe being a couple. I would have much preferred the idea of Poe and Finn being a couple. Let's have a gay couple in Star Wars. I know you get that one gay kiss at the end of this movie, but it doesn't really... It doesn't have the same effect. I think, yeah, I'm going to be on record as saying I think Finn and Poe should have been a couple in this film. I'd have loved that. But anyway, also in the original idea for this movie, Luke was haunting Kylo Ren, which is hinted at the end of The Last Jedi, and I would have loved to happen in this movie. Kylo Ren is being trained by a Sith who mentored Darth Plagueis. Darth Plagueis the Wise, who was mentioned in that exchange between Palpatine and Anakin in Revenge of the Sith. And in doing so, when Kylo Ren is being trained by this Sith, that I haven't got the name of here, but this is from the notes that I took down from what I've got from the original idea for Episode 9. When Kylo Ren is being trained by the Sith, he fights a phantom version of Darth Vader, which sounds awesome on paper. I'll get to that very shortly, why I'm saying on paper there. And also, apparently in the original idea for Episode 9, Coruscant, with a planet that we get to see a lot where the Senate is in the prequels, is a main planet in this film, and is the planet where the final battle takes place. Kylo Ren still gets redeemed, so a lot of people who's like, oh, I didn't like the idea of Kylo Ren being redeemed. Well, it sounds like in any version of this film, Kylo Ren was always going to be redeemed, and it was going to be redeemed through Leia and Han. And apparently in the original idea for the movie, Rey was going to embrace both the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force in order to bring peace to the galaxy. And again, that all sounds awesome on paper, like super awesome. Some of that stuff, just saying out loud. Kylo Ren fighting a phantom version of Darth Vader, and the idea of Rey using the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force to bring peace to the galaxy sounds perfect. There's so many things about the original idea for this movie, like Rose actually being a main character in the original idea for the movie sounds great. However, these are all great ideas on paper, and at the end of the day, it's all about execution. You can have like the worst idea on paper. Like on paper, the idea of the Lego movie is terrible. Making a movie about plastic building blocks, which I love by the way. I collect Lego all the time, but making a movie about plastic building blocks sounds like a terrible idea. And yet, look how fantastic the Lego movie is. You know, you can make a movie out of terrible ideas. And the reality is, what I've just read out there, you know, Kylo Ren being trained by the Sith who mentored Darth Plagueis, Rey using the light side, the dark side being balanced to the Force. All that sounds great on paper and are great ideas, but it's all about the execution. And I don't think Colin Trevorrow is a particularly good director. I don't think he's an awful director. I think if he makes another good movie, he could redeem himself. But look what he did with Jurassic World Dominion. That is an awfully made movie, and the first Jurassic World is not a badly made film, but it's not nearly as well made as it should have been. And Safety Not Guaranteed, it's not a bad movie. I quite like Safety Not Guaranteed, but it's not a great movie. It's not a great indie movie. It's not one of those indie gems which people are going to rave about for years to come, like Little Miss Sunshine. Colin Trevorrow hasn't made a great movie in the past, and I very much doubt he would have made a great movie here either. And I reckon that's why Disney fired him from the project. I don't know. Maybe it's just because they didn't like his ideas, which I think is silly if that was the case. But the reality is, before J.J. Abrams made a Star Wars movie, before he made The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker, J.J. Abrams made Mission Impossible 3, which is a brilliant film in my opinion, my favourite Mission Impossible film. He made the 2009 Star Trek movie, which I think is great, and he made Super 8, which I think is great, and those movies were critically acclaimed when they came out. J.J. Abrams had hits on his hand, whilst Colin Trevorrow didn't. Although those original ideas that Colin Trevorrow had for this movie sounded awesome and great and everything like that, I still today don't think that he would have done a good job making this film. And I think everybody still would have complained about it. You know, it's a whole thing that people are like, oh, I wish we got the original version of this film. I wish we got the Colin Trevorrow Duel the Fates version of Episode 9. But I think it's that whole... I think people still would have complained about it. It's that whole thing, you know, grass is always green on the other side. People always want what they can't have. People always want what they can't have. And this whole idea that the other version of Episode 9 would have been better, I don't think is totally the truth. It may have been better. You know, if Colin Trevorrow's version of Episode 9 came out, I may as well been sitting here in an alternate universe going, you know what, I'm defending Colin Trevorrow's version of Episode 9. That may well be the case in an alternate universe, in a parallel universe. But the fact is, I'm sitting in this universe. I'm sitting in this timeline. The J.J. Abrams version of Episode 9 came out, and I'm still defending it because I don't think it is badly executed. I don't think it's as well made as I don't think it's as good as it should be, but I don't think it's nearly as bad as people make it out to be. And I would have much preferred to see J.J. Abrams' version of this film, regardless of how good or bad it may have turned out, than Colin Trevorrow's version, because I do not think Colin Trevorrow is a particularly great director. And I still maintain that I'm fine with the fact that his version of the film was never made. It didn't need to be made. And I think if it was made, people would still complain about it to death. So again, his ideas for Episode 9 sounded awesome. Colin Trevorrow's version of Episode 9 sounded like it would be a great conclusion to the franchise. But it only sounds like that on paper. And I just don't know what the execution would have been like. Still, in his version of Episode 9, the original version of Episode 9, Rose is a character. And Rose isn't a character in this movie. They completely disregard Finn and Rose's romance, which is slightly set up at the end of The Last Jedi. And it's like, what? I mean, Finn and Rose share like 2 scenes, if that, in this movie. And I'm like, why is Rose sidelined? Why are you listening to those fans who just complain about everything? Make Rose a great character. And maybe J.J. Abrams did in an original cut for the film. And maybe a lot of Rose's scenes were cut by Disney executives who were worried about the response to her character again in this movie. But I think after the response to her in The Last Jedi, what they should have done with this film is make her a great character that's even more integral to the plot. But for the majority of this film, she's on the resistance base, and she just kind of uses exposition to explain things that happen, to explain to Leia what's happening in the film. And it's like, why? Give Rose more to do. I hope one day Rose is brought back in a Star Wars movie and she's given loads more to do. Bring her back in the Rey Jedi Order, in the Rey New Jedi Order film. Bring her back there. I mean, she has done some voice acting in the Lego Star Wars animated Star Wars stuff on Disney Plus, so I think she would return to the character regardless of the way she was treated by the fandom. But I still wish she was given more to do in this movie, because it feels like she's sidelined, and not in a good way at all. And I don't know why we got this new character in the movie. Why do we get Zoe Bliss? And she's played by Kay Russell. Kay Russell, who's a great actress, but isn't really given anything to do. And we got all this with Poe's passes. Like, we don't need this. Why is Jana in this film? Jana, played by Naomi Aki, who is this rising star, being in things like Blink Twice, which came out last year. Great film, and she was great in it. She was in, what's it called? Mickey 17, which came out earlier this year. Great in that film, and she's meant to be in another film that I'm forgetting on the top of my head later on this year. I think it's the Thursday Murder Club film. She seems to be a rising star in a lot right now. But although I like her performance in the film, her character's kind of worthless. I don't really understand the point of her. I get that she comes from the same background as Finn. They both want First Order troopers, but why do we need her in this film? She doesn't really provide anything. Okay, she's the one who provides the space horses, but why do we need the space horses? We didn't need them as well. There's just so much about this film that I could go on and on about that doesn't really work. There's so much about it. I'm like, why is a Death Star, and it's the second Death Star that we see, blow up into literal tiny little pieces, into nothing at the end of Return of the Jedi? Why is that Death Star in the ocean? And how come that Death Star, it shows a path to the Emperor? That doesn't make any sense to me. And why is this thing called the Wayfinder? Why can't you think of a better title for the things that we're using to try and find the Emperor? Why is this being done? Like, there's so much about this movie. I'm like, okay, who was making the decisions? And why does it all feel so rushed? And I mean, it feels rushed because apparently J.J. Abrams wanted longer to make this film. J.J. Abrams wanted another year to make this movie. And in reality, it wouldn't come out a year later because Christmas 2020, everyone remember what was going on then? I mean, not a lot, you know, because of the way because of the way the world was at that point. So the reality is, the movie probably wouldn't have come out till Christmas 2021, if that, probably Christmas 2022. And if that was the case, I think the movie would have been better. I think J.J. Abrams would have had more time to make this movie and make it properly, because it feels like he was working the 2-year barrier, and in doing so, didn't quite get to make the movie he wanted to make. It feels like he took on from Colin Trevorrow, who left the project in 2017, and tried to make the best film he could in the limited time. But I still maintain to this day that if J.J. Abrams had more time to work on this movie, it would have turned out better. I don't know that for a fact, obviously, but I still think it would have turned out better. But nevertheless, it turned out the way it did. And I can't lie, I rewatch this film. I do go back and rewatch it. I still enjoy it. And, you know, if someone was to come to me and say, well, I hate all these... The Rise of Skywalker doesn't work. And I hate all these things about it. This doesn't work, and this storyline is rubbish, and this storyline doesn't really work. I would probably sit there and agree with them. But there's just something about this movie which feels like Star Wars to me. Whether it's a John Williams musical score, the way it looks, or just the excitement that's sort of embedded within it. You know, the excitement that you get embedded within The Force Awakens is present again here, and that's because of J.J. Abrams as a filmmaker. Whether it's any of those reasons or another reason that I haven't even mentioned, there's just something about this film which makes it feel like Star Wars to me, and that is just... Well, yeah, those are just some of the reasons that I do enjoy this film. I mean, well, they're the main reasons I enjoy this movie. What am I saying? Yeah, they're the main reasons I enjoy this movie. And I understand why it got the hate it did. But I also think that anybody who completely disregards it isn't being fair to it, because clearly a time and effort was put into this movie. And although a lot of it falls flat, and although a lot of it feels unsatisfying to watch, and it doesn't really work as the conclusion to the sequel trilogy, nor the conclusion to the Star Wars saga as a whole, I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it. I would be lying to myself if I said that. I do enjoy this film. I do. I know that it's like the unpopular thing to say, but so what? I've been unpopular my entire life. And it's no different on YouTube either. You look how many people watch my reviews, it's just not that many. Saying that, I'll get loads of reviews now, and I'll get loads of people telling me, your opinion's wrong on this movie. But my opinion isn't wrong. It's all subjective. You know, the people out there who love Attack of the Clones. I don't get that. But it's the case, and I'm fine with that. I'm not taking that away from anybody. I'm not going to be online going, if you love Attack of the Clones, get away from this channel. I want nothing to do with you. No, if you love Attack of the Clones, let me know why. And I will happily debate that with you. And I love that you love that movie. And I love that there are people out there who love Star Wars movies that I don't love. You know, I don't love A New Hope. The people think it's one of the greatest movies of all time. And I love that. I don't really like... I mean, I enjoy The Phantom Menace for nostalgic reasons, but it's not a particularly good movie. And you know, the people out there who think The Phantom Menace is a good movie, and that's awesome. I don't want to take that away from them. And the people out there who love the Clone Wars TV show. I don't. I can't watch it. But I don't want to take that away from anyone that does. I don't want to take their love of the Clone Wars away from anybody at all. I don't understand why the Star Wars fandom and Star Wars movies have become this sort of war ground, this battleground. Just enjoy the Star Wars you want. I said this in my review of The Last Jedi. Star Wars, at the end of the day, and this is not an analogy. I can't speak apparently. This is not an analogy that I've just come up with, but it's an analogy which I've heard in the past. Star Wars, at the end of the day, is like a menu at a restaurant. Some things on the menu you're gonna absolutely love and order every time you go to that restaurant. Some things you just going to like on the menu for this restaurant. I might order occasionally, but not nearly as much as this stuff you love. And there's going to be some stuff at the restaurant that isn't for you. You don't like. You tasted it before, you know what? It wasn't for you. And that's totally fine. The idea that you're not a proper Star Wars fan, or that you're not allowed to like the Star Wars sequel trilogy, is dumb. And it's a sort of fan stuff that I hate. Like what you like, and let no one tell you otherwise. And you know what? I like The Rise of Skywalker. A lot of it doesn't work. A lot of it doesn't work. But I like it. And that is why I'm going to say that Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. I'm giving it that rating because I think it's slightly better than okay because of the amount of work that has been put into it. Like, the John Williams musical score isn't just okay, it's fantastic, and it helps a lot of the movie. It just helps a lot of the movie, in my opinion. It makes it a lot more watchable, and the performances are great, and the production value is great, and there's a lot that I do like about how it expands on the Star Wars galaxy, and I think there's some great scenes in the second half of the film, like Poe talking to Leia about how did you do it, and Lando coming in there. There's a lot of scenes I like in the second half of the film, actually, more scenes than I like in the first half of the film. So I do think the film improves, and you know what? It's fun to watch. It's fun to watch, and there's more than it's got energy, and there's more than I can say about the Star Wars prequel trilogy. There's more than I can say, about all the movies in the Star Wars prequel trilogy. I'm not saying Revenge of the Sith is a better movie than this movie. I'm not saying that, but Revenge of the Sith is a slow film, whilst Rise of Skywalker, say real about it, it's a fast-moving movie. So I do like that about it, and I know it has its problems. I know everybody always goes back to that one line in the movie: "Somehow Palpatine returned," which isn't a great line. And sign out here. When that happened in the movie, I was like, you didn't need to say somehow. What Poe should have just said is Palpatine returned. Because early on in the film, people forget this. They do kind of explain how Palpatine returned. They don't go into full-on detail, but Palpatine just says to Kylo Ren something like, the dark side of the Force is a pathway to forces that some find unnatural. It says something like that, which to me explains how Palpatine returned. It's not a full-on explanation, but it's a Star Wars explanation. It's like, oh yeah, the dark side of the Force brought me back, should I say. But people always go back to Poe going, somehow Palpatine returned. And they just should have taken this somehow out there. Instead, if Poe just went, Palpatine has returned, I don't think it'll become this meme that it's become. But nevertheless, it has become this meme. And it has kind of become the thing which people, when they talk about the sequel trilogy, they say it can be summed up by those three words: somehow Palpatine returned. And perhaps that's the case. Perhaps that is the case. And, I do think they would have benefited the people behind the sequel trilogy, like Kathleen Kennedy and the producers on these movies, would have benefited if this trilogy had a plan. And if they planned from the start that they'd bring the Emperor back. But they didn't need a trilogy. And at the end of the day, if I was Kathleen Kennedy, and I'm not, by the way, but if I was Kathleen Kennedy and I was sitting down to make this trilogy, and I went, okay, they didn't have a trilogy when they made the original trilogy. They didn't have a trilogy. They didn't have a plan when they made the original trilogy, but they had a plan when they made the prequel trilogy. Then I would be going on what they did with the original trilogy, because look at the response to the prequel trilogy. It wasn't a good response, was it? And look at the response to the original trilogy. It was a phenomenal response. People still talk about the original trilogy as if they're some of the best movies of all time. And I do think they are, too. I think Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi are two of the best movies ever made. So I understand why she did what she did. That being said, I do think they needed a plan. And even if they changed the plan, like George Lucas obviously changed the plan in the prequel trilogy, I just think it would have worked better, and what you would have got with episode 9 is a more satisfying conclusion. But like I've already said in this video today, I still like this film. I don't particularly love The Rise of Skywalker as a conclusion to the sequel trilogy, and as a conclusion to the Star Wars saga as a whole, but I kind of enjoy it for what it is. I enjoy it as this Star Wars theme park ride that keeps moving forward throughout. It's got this sort of romping pace. I don't know if that's the right word there, but it's got this swift pace to it, and this John Williams musical score that makes everything feel so much more exciting, and it's got this excitement embedded within it through the filmmaking, and it's got great performances from everybody, and it's a Star Wars movie which also uses real sets and real locations, and I do think that makes a difference, particularly when you watch some of the other Disney Star Wars stuff nowadays, where it's like they clearly filmed this on a set, or they clearly filmed this on the volume, the sort of virtual reality set that you get with the Mandalorian, the Book of Boba Fett, and Ahsoka. You know, I like that they use relocation filming for this movie, and there's a lot that I like about it, and because there's a lot that I like about it, including the Palpatine scenes, I do end up enjoying this movie. However, I do also think that it could have been better and should have been better. And whilst it's not a great film, I think it's an okay movie. And as I've titled this review today, somehow I enjoy this film, and I'm sticking with that. Somehow I like Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. And so, all in all, as I've already said, and as I'm going to say once more in this review today, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker is a 6.5 out of 10 from me. Anyway guys, that's it for today's podcast. If you have seen Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, and I'd be surprised if you hadn't and you watched this point in the review, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comments section below. And again, please be respectful. Everyone's got their own opinion on this movie, and that's great. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. I just don't want to be shouted at in the comments. So yeah, please let me know your thoughts on this movie, but just be respectful about it. And should I say this? Yeah, you know what? I'm going to say this. Look forward to my review of Solo, a Star Wars story, coming very, very soon on this channel. I think after I review Solo, I might take a bit of a break from doing these Star Wars reviews on the channel because it takes so long to make. But look forward to my review of Solo, a Star Wars story, coming very, very soon on this channel. But until then, guys, thank you as always for watching or listening to this podcast. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this video. I look forward to many more videos and many more podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. As I've already said, thank you so much for watching or listening to this podcast. And, well, somehow we got there in the end. I will see you guys again soon. But, bye for now. Bye. Oh, that's not working. Work! It's working. It should work now. Yes! Bye!